All right, time to go teach. Hello and welcome to this episode of Tutors, continuing our unit on ecology, and today looking at how energy is going to move through an ecosystem, because energy is the most important of all of the abiotic factors. Learning targets for today are going to be, first, to describe how energy is going to move through an ecosystem. Remember that energy cannot be created or destroyed, and so it has to move from one organism to the next organism to the next organism, and that is something that we are going to track today. Next is we are going to define trophic levels. Each step that energy is going to go through, each transfer that energy is going to take is going to start a new trophic level. And so we are going to look at what those are today, as well as, lastly, we are going to diagram those energy pathways, the different ways or directions that energy can take throughout an ecosystem. This can either be done using a food chain or a food web. And that is our goals for today. So let's get started. Energy is going to come from the sun, and it's converted from light energy to chemical energy in the process of photosynthesis, which takes place in our autotrophs, which are also going to be referred to as our producers. Plants then have two different ways that we can describe them, as being either autotrophs or as being the producers, both of which meaning the exact same thing, that they convert sunlight into chemical energy. But energy is going to travel through our ecosystems, made usable by, again, those producers as they converted the light into chemical energy, and then it's going to be obtained by heterotrophs. And what are heterotrophs? Well, heterotrophs are going to be things that eat the plant life or eat other things that ate plant life or, down the line. They are consumers. So heterotrophs are going to be referred to as consumers because they cannot actually make their own food. They need to eat other things to obtain the chemical energy that is stored in that other form of life. And if we are also going to look at another level, we have the things that break down dead matter, which is going to be your decomposers. The decomposers are going to be what recycles the matter of organisms that have died. If we're going to look at energy flow, the way we do this is we use arrows. And arrows show the direction that energy moves in. So if energy is going from the sun to our producers, causing them to be able to grow, because the producers are able to take that light energy and convert it to chemical energy, which they are able to use for their own purposes. But the energy is going to move from the producer to the consumer when the consumer eats it. In this case, a zebra, as it eats the grass, it is going to get that energy that was stored in the grass as chemical energy, and it will now obtain that energy. That's one of the reasons why the zebra has to eat the grass, is to get that energy into it. But it doesn't necessarily stop there. The energy from the zebra could end up in a lion, as the lion hunts and then eats the zebra. Notice that the arrows show the direction that the energy is moving in. The energy goes from the organism that is consumed into the organism that consumes it. And this particular diagram, with the sun removed and everything, this is called a food chain. We are looking at one specific way that energy can move in an ecosystem. The energy can move from the grass to a zebra and from zebra to a lion. The grass is referred to as a primary producer. I know it's the only level of producer, but we still call it the primary producer. It is the foundational level of our food chain. The zebra, that is the primary consumer. It eats the grass. It ate the primary producer. The primary consumer is always the thing that consumes the primary producer. Moving our way up, we get to the lion, which is a secondary consumer. It eats the primary consumer. And that is what we call trophic levels. If we had something eat the lion, that would be at the tertiary consumer level, or the third level of consumer. We could go on and on and on. Typically, though, many of our food chains don't go much beyond the secondary consumer or the tertiary consumer level because some energy is lost and made unusable in that transfer from one trophic level to the next. That means that there's not as much energy available the further up you go in these trophic levels, since some is lost or made unusable. And we could have other specific food chains as well. We could have, instead of the grass being eaten by a zebra, it could be eaten by a buffalo, which is then eaten by a lion. Or we could also have grass, which is eaten by an antelope, which a lion also eats. If we combine them, we end up with this, which is called a food web. A food web showing the different ways that these different food chains could all be constructed and put together. Now we have all of our 3 different herbivores shown here, all consuming the primary producer here, the grass, and all of them also being consumed by a lion potentially. But it doesn't just have to all go back to just be a lion. We could also add that the antelope could be eaten by a cheetah, or the zebra could be eaten by a leopard. So we can add things here and end up with a much more complex system. And that's how food webs look, showing the different ways that the energy could travel, the different potential paths that the energy could end up taking. So the energy could go along following any one of these arrow paths. And we can add some to it. We could add another primary consumer over here with the hippo, or we could go much smaller. We could have a primary consumer here, which would be a little grasshopper, which could then be eaten by a secondary consumer, which would be this finch right here. Notice that our small little bird occupies the same trophic level as the leopard, the lion, and the cheetah. They are all secondary consumers because they all eat the primary consumer. Just because the bird eats a small grasshopper and the lion or the leopard or the cheetah eat much larger herbivore mammals does not make a difference. What matters is, where did that organism get its energy from? The zebra and the grasshopper both get their energy from the same thing. They both get their energy from the grass. And that means that whatever eats them is going to be at the same trophic level. So in summary of all that, energy always travels from one organism to the next organism. And that transfer of energy can either be shown in a simple one-directional method, which is a food chain, or we can look at all of the different ways that that energy possibly could travel within that ecosystem, and that would be a food web. And each organism that happens to exist on either these food chains or food webs can be described by their particular trophic level. The plant life, the autotrophs, those producers, are called the primary producers. The organisms that eat the primary producers are the primary consumers. And the organisms that eat those would be called the secondary consumers. And the organisms that would eat those would be the tertiary consumers. And when those organisms die and get broken back down, that would happen by decomposers. And those are some of the different trophic levels that you should know. And that is it for this time. Until next time, be awesome, stay awesome.